Hi, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Temi. I am a reader and researcher and writer and PhD student based in the UK. I am currently researching Black women's digital intimacy. That is my main thesis topic right now. And yeah, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about some books that I have read recently. Is this a monthly roundup? Effectively, yes, but I don't think I'm always going to be able to get to it like right at the end of the month. So we're just going to call this books that I've read. That is what the series is called. This month, or let's say in January, I read 10 books, but I'm not going to talk about all 10 just because some of them I don't think it's worth discussing or I don't want to discuss. And I read one academic book and then three nonfiction, and then I think I also read 3 fiction. But yeah, I'm not going to talk about all of them. I just want to talk really quickly about what I'm currently reading. So the first book I'm currently reading right now is What You're Looking For and Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama, translated by Alison Watts. Really enjoying that, has a really cozy feel. And then the book I'm reading for personal, not pleasure, and not for work is This Is Where, I don't know if you're going to be able to see that. This is where, nope. Okay, I'm going to insert it here because you can't see it. The book I'm reading currently is This Is Where You Belong. And this is The Art and Science of Loving the Place You Live by Warnick. I have had this book for a couple of years. Sorry, the light is not working. I've had this book for a couple of years. And I really felt called to it because I'm someone who has moved a lot. I've pretty much moved every single year over the past 6 years, and the idea of belonging, what it means to belong for someone who is sort of a third culture kid, for someone who has lived in many different places, is something that I think about deeply and frequently. So that's the spiel. I'm going to start off with my work reads, and then I'm going to go to nonfiction, and then I'm going to go to fiction. So feel free to skip through all of those. Okay, so the first book that I'll talk about is this one, which is On Friendship by pahl. It took me a really long time to get this book. It was sold out. I don't know why it was sold out. Anyway, pahl is a research professor at the Institute for Social and Economic Research in Essex, and I think he's also retired, so he is an emeritus professor elsewhere. He is a sociologist. I thought this cover was interesting because I'm pretty sure that's some sort of like African, maybe Ghanaian textile that they've got in the photo, and if you can't see, it is 2 hands sort of coming together. If you're a sociologist, if you're a digital sociologist like I am, you might find this interesting if you're interested in behavior, in the things, in understanding why people do things around different types of relationships. This book is obviously about friendship, and as someone who is researching Black women's friendship, that's why I picked it up. The only thing that I'm going to talk about in this book is that the book sort of talks about what it means to be a friend, what it means for friends, for humans, from sort of like Aristotle to contemporary, I think like 1990 to early 2000s. It talks about like friendship in the self, friendship in the context of other relationships we have, friendship and how it's gendered. And a lot of those things go into more depth in, let's say, research articles and other books. But the thing that I found myself, I mean, I have also annotated this quite heavily because, again, I'll use this in my research. But pahl talks about there being a dialectic in friendship between affection and instrumentality. And basically what that means is that he argues that there are 2 sort of like things in tension or in relationship with each other in friendship. And that is attachment and affection, and having a sense of commitment or a sense of obligation. And so basically within a friendship between 2 people, those 2 sides can be in tension with each other. So you can have someone who feels a high sense of attachment, but a low sense of obligation to a friendship. And you can see how that will shift what that relationship looks like. Conversely, you can also have someone who has a low sense of obligation and a low sense of attachment or affection. And you can again see how that would be a friendship that is more likely to dissolve and to fizzle out. And I think in the so-called epidemic of loneliness that we're going through, in the reduction of third spaces that's happening in the UK and elsewhere, I think friendship is really important to understand, and I find myself thinking about that. But I think it's really helpful, just as a lens personally, to see how like friendships that you might have might be might place in this sort of dialectic that Ray talks about. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see that. Probably not. Maybe I'll insert a clip, but basically he just says that it's a figure. And so I thought that was really interesting. If you're not interested in friendship, you're not gonna get that one. Okay, so the next section will be nonfiction, and I am going to talk about another Katherine May book. I say Katherine May because I think I've talked about her a few times in some of my books, some of my videos on BookTube recently. This was her first book, The Electricity of Every Living Thing. I say this is her first one because her second book, that was my first introduction to her, Wintering, is the book that I picked up first. And this is a woman's walk in the wild to find her way home. I didn't love this book as much as I loved Wintering. The premise of this book is that I think in like 2015, Katherine, it's a memoir again about a woman figuring things out and walking. So it has all the things that I typically love in a memoir, but I didn't love this as much. So the premise is that Katherine decides to walk the Southwest Coast Path, which is like a long through hike in the UK, because she wanted to understand like why life was feeling so hard, why she was really struggling with her child, which I don't think was a newborn, but was maybe like a toddler, while things weren't feeling so good with her partner, and also because she just likes walking. So that's the premise of the book. I didn't like this book as much because Katherine, and like kudos to her for being honest, I guess, but she comes across quite difficult and sort of like writes as though she had a real just sort of abruptness and like almost what seems like disdain for people in her close relationships, like her partner and her child. The second story in this book is that she is learning that she might have, I think, Asperger's syndrome. And so throughout this book, it's also a critique, I would say, or I would say a critique on what it means to be diagnosed with Asperger's or something within the spectrum of autism as an adult, particularly in the UK, and what it means to accept that diagnosis for yourself and also for your family, and like how you can help them through that process. I would say it didn't feel as succinct. It didn't feel as smooth. It just didn't read as well for me as Wintering. I couldn't get a sense of if she was just ranting about how angry she was with stuff, if this was actually a piece of travel writing about the Southwest Coast Path. It just felt a bit disjointed at times. So if you're interested just like in her body of work, then I would pick this up, but I didn't love this book at all. The next book I'm going to talk about is one that I have talked a bit about already on my Instagram, which is How Kyoto Breaks Your Heart by Florentina Leow. I heard about this book through Hannah May. Is that her last name? Hannah.May on YouTube and Instagram. And when they mentioned it, yeah, it just was sound right up my alley. Again, this is a memoir by a woman. And also this book is about friendship, or about women's friendship, or so I had thought. So the reason why I picked this book up, because they talk about, like the blurb says that like Florentina is exhilarated when an old acquaintance offers her an opportunity for work and cohabitation in a little house in the hills of Kyoto. Their relationship burns bright, but seasons change and things grow strange between the two women. I love literature and books and writing that talks about relationality, if you haven't guessed by now by my research topic. And so I really thought this book was going to be about what happens when relationships go sour, friendships, because I don't feel like we have a lot of that. However, this book just, I feel like maybe my expectations were too high. I'm not sure. Let's start with the positives. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous book about life in Kyoto. If you haven't been, this book will make you want to go. I've been to Kyoto and I've been to Tokyo. And when I was reading this book, a lot of how Florentina describes those places really resonated with me and took me back to my time there. I would also say, like, she's a brilliant food writer. The way that she writes about food is phenomenal. Not in the sense that I think you can have food writers that make you really excited about eating, and I think you have food writers that make you think about food in a different way, and that's what Florentina does. The first essay. That's the other thing. I thought it was like a seamless memoir book, but I actually think it is a series of essays which are together. But I'll talk about those things later. So the first essay is Persimmons. This is just, it's just so beautifully written. And maybe I'll read what I actually wrote about my other review. So I would say this is my most anticipated read for January, but it's a bit of a mixed bag. Leow writes gorgeously on food and cities and the ways that both can make you feel at ease in a new place. The ways that new foods are an easy introduction to learning about Kyoto and about Japan. Disappointingly, I wish the sections on friendship as a friendship researcher were more in depth. We learn about the breakup from Leow's reflective journal-like entries weaved across the different essays, but it was quite vague, so hard to get a sense of a real understanding of what that friendship was. As the blurb does allude to, my favorite essay is Persimmons, and I wish there was more of this type of writing in the short collection. Ultimately, I felt it required a sharper edit and structuring of the essays. So yeah, that's my kind of review, I guess, on it. Again, I annotated it quite intensely because I think I will pull from this for my research. It's a little book. I think if you go into it thinking it's an essay collection rather than a memoir, like a cohesive memoir, then that might shape your experience a little differently. There is one section this one little blurb that I really loved. And Leow writes, "We have so many ways to handle romantic breakups, but so few to navigate friendship breakups. It's hard to talk about losing close friends. Most of us don't have the vocabulary for it because it feels like failing at a compulsory class everyone passes just for turning up. It's a painful and embarrassing fuck up, a wound you can't admit to publicly." And first of all, just like +1, I totally agree with her analysis on friendship breakups there. But that sort of writing, I thought that the whole collection was going to be about, and it wasn't. So I guess that's why I was disappointed. But I would still recommend this book just for its travel writing, its food writing, and just like the essays on Kyoto itself. So that is How Kyoto Breaks Your Heart. The next book is similarly on the same vein about an essay collection, but I knew it was an essay collection this time, and it's edited by Angelica Malin, and it is Unattached Essays on Singlehood. That says a lot. This was fine, you know, this read like a bunch of different Refinery 29 articles, I would say. I think it's 30 women in general, trans-inclusive, which is great. I just didn't love it. Like, I thought it could have been less. I thought it could have been structured again better. The whole premise is basically what it means to be single as a woman, mainly in the UK. I felt it was a bit one note. I felt that there could have been more inclusion of queer stories, more inclusion of perspectives outside of the UK or outside of the so-called West. I felt like that would have been a stronger essay collection. One of my favorite writers, Porna Bell, she is a journalist and a writer from the UK, a South Asian journalist and writer, and I really loved her story. Her essay talks about her, I guess, existing and living after becoming a widow in her 30s. I think Porna is just a brilliant writer, and I think she writes about relationships in a way that is I want to say like a foundation. I don't know. It feels very honest and it feels very real. And I appreciate her writing for that. So her essay on soulmates was really touching. It was fine. I think if you're looking about work on singlehood and being a woman, get Amy Key's book. Get Amy Key's book, Arrangements on Blue. It is gorgeous. It is amazing. Get that book and don't get this book. Yeah, that is Unattached. And I think those are all the nonfiction books that I'm going to talk about. Okay, then for fiction, the first book I'm going to talk about is Heartburn by Nora Ephron. This book is hilarious, but I think I found it really hilarious because I listened to this book on audio. I got it from my library, from the Libby app. If you don't know what that is, get it. It's great. And Meryl Streep read it, and that I think elevated this book because Meryl, just incredible. And I could see Meryl playing the main character. So Heartburn, for anyone who doesn't know, is a romantic tragedy by Nora Ephron, and it follows the character Rachel, who basically realizes that her husband is cheating on her, and so we follow her from her perspective, first person written perspective, her figuring out that her husband is cheating on her. I would say this book is hilarious in the way that Nora can be, and it's hilarious because Nora writes dialogue that is so realistic. Like I could see these conversations in my head. I believed in these characters. I believed in the things that they were saying, and also because Meryl Streep was the narrator, I believed that Meryl would play Rachel. I remember thinking that there was some outdated language and terms, I think about Jewish people, which was a bit jarring. Nothing like a slur, but just sort of like a bit of outdated descriptions, and something that I don't think is maybe necessary. And I think I also read somewhere that it is semi-autobiographical. Which is sad because it's hilarious in the way that she writes it, but it's a sad story. There aren't that many different characters, so you have like Rachel, you have the sort of like the sense of who Rachel is. So she's kind of like a very well-to-do middle-class woman. She is a writer. Her husband works in politics on the Hill and in the US, so like in DC, and they're sort of like their friendship circle. One second. Yeah, so you get a sense of their friendship circle and that sort of like, you know, the environment that she is operating in. And so there's this tension in that she's trying to figure out like who is cheating on someone. She doesn't realize that it's her, within this context of like trying to save face, I would say, because of the circles that she runs in. Throughout the novel, we also learn about the recipes that Rachel, the character, is writing, is cooking, which really reminded me of Julia Childs in that sense. Again, I think does Meryl Streep play Julia Childs in that movie? Did I make that up? I don't know, but yeah, it had that sort of like Julia Childs-esque quirkiness about the recipes. I wondered if the recipes were real. Did I try any of them? No, because honestly, some of them sounded nasty. Yeah, it was just like a really fun read. It was kind of a romp. I'm not sure if I had read it that I would have enjoyed it as much. I did actually pick this book up a couple of years ago at the airport, and I tried to get into it and I just couldn't. But reading the Meryl Streep or listening to the Meryl Streep version definitely changed it. Also really reminded me of sort of like a one-woman play type of thing. I would recommend if you're wanting like a really lighthearted romantic tragedy, but listen to the Meryl Streep version because that made it so much better. The next book that I'll discuss, I will talk about Weasels in the Attic. This tiny little book, I think I read it in an afternoon in January. It is by Hiroko Oyamada, translated by David Boyd, and it is published by Granta. I know that Granta is a publisher that I end up liking. Like I'm not that well clued up about all the publishers and everything, but like when I notice that it's granta, I'm like, ah, that makes sense. This book follows two friends across 3 meetings. So there's a meeting with the narrator and his friend in a pet shop, the narrator and his friend at a dinner party, and the narrator and his friend in their new home. It has a weird, unnerving tension in this book. And I think it's because Hiroko writes about the mundane. He writes about the everydayness of life. So, you know, like meeting a friend after work, meeting their partner, trying to figure out what snacks to have. It's in that analysis or in that description of the mundane that, you know, through a close read, you would understand what the tensions, what the themes are in this book. And I would say this book is about fatherhood. This book is about friendships and relationships and what happens when you have different expectations, and then also when your friends' relationships change and become quote unquote more adult than yours does. What I noticed in this book is that there are women in this book, but they are often just devices to learn about the narrator and the other male characters. But that is also another sort of tension point in this book. I would say, like, in this book, the mundane elements reveal sort of like the elephant in the room. It reveals the bigger issue. It's really small, so I don't want to give too many like spoilers. I would say it's something that you might have to read again a few times. Like, I found myself reading over paragraphs because I was like, wait, what's happening here? Like, in the ways that I would do in my English literature class when you would really have to spend a moment with a paragraph. It's so small that if you read through it, you might have a tendency to think nothing happened, right? But stuff just happened, but you have to pay attention to it. I think it is a really good snapshot about fatherhood and about male relationships, and particularly about how stereotypically or so-called people say all the time, also friendship researchers, that like men don't talk about things. I would say that this book is a great example of that sort of like issue in male friendships. I think I will also probably read this again because, again, it's one of those things I think you have to spend a bit more time with the writing because it's so short. And what's the final one that I'm going to talk about? Okay. The final one I'm going to talk about is one I read on my Kindle, and it's Brandon Taylor's The Late Americans. I'm laughing because I really didn't like this book. I really didn't like this book, and I think I am in the minority, so I feel a bit nervous to talk about it because I really did not like it. Okay, so this book is very literary. It's capital LF literary fiction. It's incredibly character driven. What is the premise? What is the synopsis? In The Late Americans, we follow, I want to say, between 3 to 5 characters. Brandon focuses on a community of sort of like young, queer, predominantly men, young adults / grad students in, like, I'm going to say Middle America. Is it Middle America? I don't know, but it gives Middle America vibes. I think it's like Iowa. I don't know. And we get these like snapshots of their lives. And I say snapshots is because you just sort of like jump into a section. There's no real exposition. It just sort of like you're landed, you're right there. Very much like fly on the wall, seeing what's happening, but then also understanding the perspective of the current narrator. The narrators shift with the different characters. The first character we meet is someone who's in a MFA program. I'm pausing because this book felt like a critique on MFA programs and the sort of hoi polloi or like the well-to-do people who take those programs compared with the working class kids who are in those programs, who are really struggling to you know, make it in a really harsh career. I would say that I really struggled without any sort of context of these characters. I also didn't like really any of the characters. There was nothing in them that I felt like I was rooting for. I think maybe I was only rooting for the dancer character, which I think that his name is Ivan. We see them make these silly, stupid decisions without really any understanding or explanation for why. I think I struggle with literary fiction in that sometimes, is that, yes, I love a character analysis. I love interesting, messy characters, but I need to understand their motivations a little bit. Like, if I'm not understanding their motivations, I can't root for them, and that makes me feel less involved, and then I judge them really harshly because I'm like, baby girl, what are you doing? What are you, like, explain it to me, right? I would also say that this book is quite violent. Like, there were some sections about sexual assault, or that blurred line where it's sexual assault, but then like the character really kind of liked that it was like violent, that I wasn't prepared for. It's also really explicit. And me, I'm not shy thinking about sex, talking about sex, but like this man was going into detail about the blowjobs, and I was just not prepared. So I think it felt just a little bit like all over the place. And again, I couldn't figure out what the so what was of the book. And maybe this is because I'm an academic, but when you are writing analysis, when you're critiquing something, I need to understand what's the so what? What does this mean? What is the bigger point you're trying to make here? And maybe in this book, it was just a discussion of really messy characters in their early 20s trying to figure it out. And that's fine, but it fell a little bit flat for me, honestly. And I think the other thing that I'll say about Late Americans is that me, I'm 34, and I do not have this sort of like big questioning of like, what am I going to be when I'm older? How am I going to make it? I did that, I did that in my early 20s and my mid 20s. And so maybe that's also why I found it hard to connect with, because I'm not in that stage of life anymore. And therefore it didn't resonate with me as much. So that is The Late Americans. Yeah, so those are the books that I've been reading recently / in January. Let me know if you've read any of them. Let me know which ones you find interesting or compelling, if any of them have been added to your TBR. And I'm really interested on people's comments and reflections on Late Americans, because I follow Brandon Taylor on Twitter and on Blue Sky, and I really like what they have to say. I just really didn't like that novel. Anyway, I will see you in my next video, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!